The evening sun sank behind Portland's skyline, washing the streets in a soft golden glow. The air smelled faintly of rain and roasted coffee beans drifting from the small cafe on Maple Street, where Evelyn Ross wiped down the counter after a long day. She liked closing shifts, the quiet after the crowd, the soft jazz playing in the background, the peaceful routine that kept her thoughts still. But that evening, the peace broke the moment the doorbell chimed and she looked up. Standing by the entrance was Michael Carter. For a second, her mind refused to believe it. 3 years had passed since she had last seen him. Back then, he was walking away from her porch with a suitcase and a half-hearted smile, saying he'd stay in touch. He never did. And now, he was just there tall.com familiar. Her breath caught, but she forced herself to keep wiping the counter. Pretending her heart wasn't racing, he looked almost the same. The same quiet eyes, the same way he carried himself, gentle yet distant. The only difference was the hint of tiredness in his face, as if life had added weight to his smile. Evelyn. His voice was soft, uncertain. But it reached her like a memory she'd tried to forget. She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in years. "Michael, it's been a while." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I wasn't sure if you'd even recognize me." She gave a small laugh, one that sounded lighter than she felt. "You haven't changed that much." But he had danned, so had she. Evelyn wasn't the same woman who once waited by her phone hoping for a message that never came. Time had taught her quiet acceptance. She had learned how to stop expecting, how to let moments fade without chasing after them. Yet seeing him again stirred something she thought was going to soft ache that made her want to look away and look closer at the same time. He stepped forward, glancing around the cafe. "You're still here." "Same place." She nodded, crossing her arms. "It's a good job. Keeps me busy." There was a pause. Not awkward exactly, just heavy with the things neither of them dared to say. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. Outside, people hurried past with umbrellas. The city alive and unaware of the small reunion. Happening behind the glass, Michael looked at her like he was searching for the right words. "You look happy." She smiled. A practiced kind of smile. "I manage." He nodded, as if that answer made sense to him, though it didn't. They both knew she wasn't the type to say what she truly felt. She never was. He leaned on the counter, and for a moment it almost felt normal. Like old times when he dropped by just to see her, pretending to want coffee, but really just wanting to talk. Back then, she'd tease him about ordering the same thing every day. Back then, everything felt simple. But now, there was a space between them, quiet, invisible, but impossible to cross. "Do you ever think about those days?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn froze. She could lie and say she didn't, but what would be the point? The truth sat there, raw and uninvited. "Sometimes," she said softly. "Mostly when I'm here late and the place is empty." He smiled faintly. "I do too." That small confession made something inside her shift, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't. Too much time had passed. And she'd built her peace carefully, like a fragile wall she didn't want to break. "So, what brings you back?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Michael hesitated. "Work, mostly, but I guess I just wanted to see home again." Home. That word landed differently. He used to call Portland his home, but after he left, it stopped being one for her. Still, she nodded, pretending the word didn't sting. He looked around once more, taking in the shelves, the small plants by the window, the familiar space that had barely changed. "You kept this place the same." "Maybe I'm not good at letting go," she said before she could stop herself. Their eyes met again, steady, searching. There was a softness in his gaze that made her heart twist. For a second, it felt like time hadn't moved at all. But then reality came rushing back. They were not who they used to be. Life had gone on without them. Michael checked his watch like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "I didn't mean to show up unannounced," he said. "I just saw the sign and thought, maybe—" "It's fine," Evelyn interrupted gently. "Really, it's just unexpected." He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I didn't plan it either." Silence again. The kind that said more than words could. She wanted to ask him why he never wrote, why he disappeared without a single explanation. She wanted to ask if he ever missed her, if leaving was as easy as it looked. But she didn't. She just smiled faintly. The kind of smile people give when they've already forgiven what still hurts. When the clock struck closing time, Stu turned off the lights behind the counter. Michael stood there, unsure if he should go or stay. "I should let you close up," he said. She nodded. "Yeah, it's late." He walked toward the door, pausing halfway. "Evelyn." "Yes, it's good to see you again." Her voice was steady, though her heart wasn't. "You too, Michael." He smiled one last time, a quiet kind of smile that said everything they didn't. Then he walked out into the night, and the soft ring of the cafe door faded behind him. Evelyn stood still for a moment, staring at the reflection of the streetlights on the floor. Her chest felt tight, but not in the painful way it used to. It was the kind of ache that comes from remembering something beautiful that couldn't last. She turned off the last light and whispered to herself, "Don't think about it, Evelyn." But she did, all night. The memory of his voice, his eyes, the way he said her name, it all played in her mind like an unfinished song. And though she tried to brush it off, deep down she knew the truth. Seeing him again had stirred a piece of her heart. She thought she had buried long ago. Still, she didn't chase after him. She didn't call out, didn't ask for closure. She just stood there in the quiet cafe, letting the soft rain tap against the window, letting time move on without her needing to fight it. Because sometimes silence is all that's left when words come too late. And so, once again, Evelyn just kept quiet and accepted it. The next morning, the sky over Portland was gray and soft rain brushed the sidewalks. Evelyn arrived early at the cafe, hoping the day would pass quietly. She told herself last night didn't mean anything, that Michael showing up was just coincidence. But deep down she knew that wasn't true. The memory of his voice still lingered, and she caught herself glancing at the door more than once. As if waiting by noon, the cafe had its usual rhythm students on laptops. An older couple sharing pie, the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans in the air. Evelyn focused on taking orders, smiling, wiping tables, doing everything to keep her mind busy. She was pulling a new tray of croissants from the oven when she heard it again, the soft chime of the door. Michael he stood there in a gray jacket, his hair damp from the drizzle. For a second, she froze, then quickly looked away. He gave a small smile, one that looked more nervous than before. "Hey," he said. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" Evelyn nodded, keeping her tone professional. "Of course. Same as before." "Yeah," he said. Black coffee. She turned to the espresso machine, pretending not to feel the weight of his gaze. Her hands moved, automatically grind. Pour, steam, but her mind was anything but steady. Why was he here again? Was it just coffee or something more? When she placed the cup on his table, he looked up at her with that old warmth in his eyes. "You always made it better than anyone else," he said lightly. She smiled politely. "It's just coffee, Michael." He leaned back, studying her. "Maybe, but you always made things feel easier, even when they weren't." His words hit her like a wave of nostalgia. There was a time when they used to sit together for hours talking about dreams, future plans, everything and nothing. Now all that was gone, replaced by polite conversation and guarded smiles. "How have you been, really?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. She could tell the truth that she had missed him, that she had waited for months before finally giving up, but she wasn't that woman anymore. "Busy," she said simply. "Life goes on." Michael nodded slowly, looking down at his cup. "Yeah, it does." For a while, neither spoke. The cafe buzzed softly around them, the hum of music mixing with quiet chatter. It wasn't awkward silence, it was heavier than that. It was the silence of two people who once knew each other deeply, but now didn't know how to begin again. He finally looked up. "I heard you stayed in town. I thought you were planning to move to Seattle." Evelyn gave a small shrug. "Plans change." He smiled faintly. "I guess they do." She didn't tell him why she stayed, that she couldn't bring herself to leave the city that still held his memories. The park they used to walk through, the diner they went to after long shifts. The old bookstore on 9th Street where he once bought her a copy of The Great Gatsby. She had tried to move on, but every corner whispered pieces of their story. He took a sip of his coffee. I missed this place. The smell, the rain, the way everyone knows each other. It feels the same. It hasn't changed much, she said. Just me, still making coffee. Michael gave a soft laugh. And still pretending everything's fine. That made her look up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? He raised his hands. Nothing bad. It's just, you always do that. You hold things in. She stared at him, unsure what to say. He wasn't wrong. Evelyn had always been the quiet one, the one who smiled through disappointment, who never asked for more than what people offered. Even when Michael left without saying goodbye, she didn't call him back. She told herself it was for the best, that silence was easier than rejection. Now, sitting across from him, she felt the same helpless quiet creeping in again. I'm not the same person you remember, she said after a moment. He looked at her, eyes steady. Neither am I. There was honesty in his tone, and that scared her more than anything, because she could feel that he meant it. He wasn't just visiting, was trying to find something again, maybe even her. But she wasn't sure she wanted to be found. The doorbell rang again, and Evelyn was grateful for the distraction. A small rush of customers came in, and she excused herself to take their orders. She moved quickly, thankful for the noise that replaced the tension at their table. Yet every time she passed him, she could feel his eyes following her. When the rush ended, she noticed his coffee had gone cold. Still, he hadn't moved? You're still here? She asked softly. He smiled. I didn't want to leave without saying what I came to say. Evelyn froze. Her heartbeat quickened. She set the tray down carefully. What's that? He took a deep breath, his voice lower now. I'm sorry, Evelyn, for leaving the way I did, for not calling, for making you think you didn't matter. She blinked, her throat tightening. It was a long time ago. I know, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. But I never stopped thinking about you. I thought leaving was the right thing, that I needed to figure out my life first. But it turns out I left behind the only part that made sense. Her chest ached, but she held her composure. You can't just come back and say that like nothing happened. I'm not saying nothing happened, he said quickly. I know what I did. I just thought maybe we could talk. Evelyn turned away, looking out the window. The rain had stopped and the sky was clearing. For some reason, that felt symbolic. Talk about what? The past? About us, he said. If there's still an us. His words hung in the air like a fragile note that might break if touched. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him everything she'd felt the nights she couldn't sleep. The quiet heartbreak she carried, the way she learned to live without him. But another part of her knew it was too late. The wound had healed, just not cleanly. After a long pause, she said quietly, Michael, some things don't go back to what they were. He nodded slowly. I know. But maybe they can become something new. Her heart softened a little at that, but she stayed silent. The truth was, she didn't trust her heart anymore. Not around him. Sat like that for a few minutes, both lost in their thoughts, the sound of rain returning outside. It wasn't a storm, just a soft drizzle, like the sky was letting out what it had held in too long. Evelyn understood that feeling well. When his phone buzzed, Michael stood up, hesitating. I have to go. But can I see you again? She hesitated. Maybe, he smiled slightly, knowing that maybe was more than he expected. I'll take that. As he walked out, Evelyn exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She leaned against the counter, eyes following him through the window until he disappeared into the rain. The cafe felt emptier after that. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was sharp, full of things unsaid. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her heart. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that seeing him again had stirred feelings she thought she had buried for good. And though part of her longed to believe his words, another part whispered caution. For now, she told herself what she always did quietly, firmly. I'll be fine. And as always, she just kept quiet and accepted it. The air that evening carried a soft chill. The streets of Portland glowed under dim streetlights, reflections of yellow and white shimmering across the wet pavement. Evelyn closed the cafe late, her thoughts a tangled storm she couldn't quiet. She told herself not to think about Michael, not to read too much into his visit. But when she stepped outside, she found him waiting by the corner. Hands in his coat pockets, that same quiet look on his face. I didn't mean to startle you, he said, his voice calm but uncertain. Evelyn tightened her scarf. You didn't? I just wasn't expecting anyone. He gave a small, almost hesitant smile. You always walk home alone this late? Most nights, she said. It's peaceful. I'll walk with you, he offered simply. She hesitated, then nodded. They began walking side by side through the quiet streets, their footsteps echoing against the wet concrete. For a while, neither spoke. It wasn't. An awkward silence. It was full, heavy, like both were afraid that words might break something fragile between them. The city hummed softly around them, passing cars, the distant bark of a dog, the sound of rain beginning again. Evelyn's heart beat a little faster, not because of fear, but because of the strange comfort of having him beside her again. Michael glanced at her. Do you still live in that apartment near the river? She nodded. Yeah, I tried moving once, but it didn't feel right. I remember that place, he said, smiling faintly. You used to complain about the noisy neighbors. She laughed softly. They still fight about the same things. For a brief second, the tension melted. They talked about small, ordinary things, work, the weather, how the old bookstore downtown had finally closed. It felt easy, like breathing after holding it in too long. But underneath it all, the real question hung there, unspoken. When they reached the old bridge, Evelyn slowed down. The city lights shimmered across the water, a quiet mirror of everything she was feeling. This was your favorite spot, she said, leaning on the railing. He looked out at the water. Still is. They stood there for a long moment, the night wrapping around them. Then he spoke, his voice low and honest. I missed this. I missed us. Evelyn turned to him slowly, her heart tightening. Michael, you can't just say that like it's simple. I know it's not, he said quickly. But I can't pretend it doesn't mean anything to see you again. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. You left without saying goodbye. Do you know how that felt? He looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. Didn't want to hold you back. I had no plan, no stability. Thought you deserved better. She shook her head. You decided that for me. His silence said he knew she was right. Evelyn turned away, her eyes glistening under the streetlight. You were gone, Michael. I had to learn to live without you. Do you know how many mornings I woke up waiting for a message that never came? How many nights I convinced myself you'd come back? He stepped closer, voice breaking slightly. I'm sorry, I can't change what I did. When I saw you again, I realized I never really left you behind. Her breath hitched. Part of her wanted to believe him, another part screamed at her not to. She had spent years rebuilding herself, learning how to be okay again. But hearing those words brought everything back. Why now? She asked quietly. Why come back after all this time? He took a deep breath. Because I finally understand what I lost. I kept chasing things, jobs, plans, places, and nothing felt right. Everything reminded me of you. I thought time would make it fade, but it didn't. It just made me realize how wrong I was. Evelyn blinked back tears, staring at the water. The city lights blurred slightly through them. You think saying that fixes it? No, he said softly. But maybe it's a start. The rain started to fall harder now, tapping gently against their coats. Michael didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, waiting for her to say something. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She wanted to let go, to forgive, to step back into something that once felt like home, but the years between them stood like a wall. Finally, she turned to him, her voice trembling but calm. Michael, I don't hate you. I never did. But I don't know if I can do this again. It's a part of me that waited for you. That version of Mishi's gone. He looked at her, his expression full of quiet sadness. I understand. They stood there, the rain between them like a soft curtain. Then he whispered, if you ever change your mind, I'll be around. This time, I'm not running. Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. Maybe that's good to hear. But don't wait for me either. He nodded slowly. Okay. They walked the rest of the way in silence. The closeness between them wasn't what it used to be, but it wasn't gone either. It was something new, mature, bittersweet, and real. When they reached her building, Michael stopped. This is you, he said quietly. Yeah. She hesitated, not sure how to end this moment. He looked at her one last time. Take care of yourself, Evelyn. You too. He gave a small nod, then turned to leave. But after a few steps, he stopped and looked back. You know, I always thought we'd find our way back to each other. Her eyes met his, soft but steady. Maybe we did, just not the way you imagined. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the space between them, gentle, steady, forgiving. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and loss. Good night, Evelyn. She watched him walk away, his figure fading into the mist. When he finally disappeared, she leaned against the doorway. Her heart heavy but strangely calm. She had imagined this moment so many times, what she would say if he ever came back. She thought she'd cry or shout or maybe fall apart. But instead, she just felt still. That night, as she sat by her window, watching the rain slide down the glass, Evelyn realized something. Closure doesn't always come with perfect words or clean endings. Sometimes it's just understanding that what's lost can still be meaningful, even if it never returns the same way. She smiled faintly, remembering his last look, the warmth in his voice, the honesty in his apology. There was peace in that, even if there was no happy ending. And as the rain slowed and the city lights shimmered in quiet reflection, Evelyn whispered to herself, some things are better left unspoken. She knew she would see him again, maybe not soon, maybe not ever, but this time she wasn't waiting. She wasn't broken. She was simply accepting what was. And once again, just as she had before, Evelyn kept quiet and accepted it. A week passed since that rainy night on the bridge. The days moved quietly, like pages turning in a book. Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to finish. The cafe looked the same, but something inside her had shifted. She found herself glancing at the door, sometimes half expecting Michael to walk in again, half hoping he wouldn't. Life had returned to its rhythm. But the silence he left behind had a new weight, gentler. This time, not painful. Just real. It was a slow Tuesday morning when the bell above the door rang, and there he was again. Michael stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee from another shop across town. Evelyn froze, surprised but not startled. He smiled shyly, holding 1 cup toward her. Peace offering, he said. You've been making my coffee for years. I thought I'd return the favor once. She hesitated, then accepted it with a small smile. Thank you. I didn't think I'd see you again so soon. If I wasn't planning to stay long, he admitted, setting his cup down. If I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly this time? Evelyn's heart softened. He looked tired, but calm. There was something honest in his expression, something that told her this time was different. So, you're leaving again? He nodded. Yeah, I got a job offer in Chicago. It's a good opportunity. Feels like the right thing to do. She nodded slowly, stirring her coffee, though it didn't need it. You've always chased new things. Maybe, he said quietly. But this time, I'm not running. I just want to move forward. They sat at a small table near the window, sunlight spilling through the glass. The city outside felt peaceful. There were no grand speeches, no tension. Just 2 people who once shared everything, now learning how to part without breaking. Evelyn looked at him thoughtfully. You know, for a long time, I thought if I ever saw you again, I'd ask why you left. I wanted answers. And now? He asked gently. She smiled faintly. Now I realize it doesn't matter. You left because you had to. I stayed because I chose to. We both did what we thought was right at the time. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I hurt you. You did, she said simply. But that's part of growing up, isn't it? We all hurt someone while figuring out who we are. Michael's eyes softened. You've changed. Had to, she said, her tone quiet but firm. You can't wait forever for someone to come back. Eventually you learn to love your own company. He smiled, but there was sadness behind it. You deserve someone who stays. I think I deserve peace, she said, meeting his eyes. And I think I've finally found it. For a while, they just sat there, sipping coffee, talking about small things, her cafe, his new job, the books they used to read. It wasn't like before. It was lighter, like both of them had finally put down something heavy they'd been carrying too long. When the clock neared noon, Michael stood. I should head out. My flight's in a few hours. Evelyn nodded, feeling her heart tighten in that quiet, familiar way. I'm glad you came by. Me too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. There's something I wrote. Nothing dramatic. Just words I needed to say. She took it, her fingers brushing his briefly. Thank you. He hesitated for a moment, then said softly, You'll always be part of my story, Evelyn. No matter where I go. She smiled gently, and you'll always be a chapter in mine. He laughed quietly. I like that. They stood there, unsure of what came next. There was no need for promises, no need for goodbyes filled with tears. It's just understanding. Just acceptance. When he finally walked toward the door, Evelyn didn't stop him. She didn't ask him to stay, didn't tell him to come back someday. Just simply watched him go, her heart full gnawed with regret. But with peace. As the door closed behind him, the bell gave one soft chime. The cafe was quiet again. Evelyn stood still for a moment, then opened the note he had left. It was simple, handwritten, a few uneven lines. I once thought love meant holding on. But maybe it's about knowing when to let go. Thank you for teaching me that. Michael. Evelyn folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled a small, real smile that came from somewhere deep. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for anything. That evening after closing, she walked down to the river. The sky was painted in soft pink and gold, and the bridge shimmered under the fading light. The same bridge where they'd stood days ago, where she had finally spoken the words she once kept buried. She leaned against the railing, watching the water ripple. Everything felt still, peaceful. She realized she wasn't sad anymore. There was something freeing in knowing that love didn't have to end in forever, could end in understanding. In quiet gratitude. For years, she thought closure would come with an apology or a promise. But standing there, feeling the evening wind brush her hair, she understood that closure was this peace in her own heart. Forgiveness without needing anything in return. She whispered softly, almost to herself, I'm okay now. And she was. The city lights flickered to life, and Evelyn started walking back home. The streets were familiar, but they didn't feel heavy anymore. She passed the little bookstore. That had closed, the park they used to walk through, the corner where he once waited for her. They were no longer reminders of loss, but pieces of a story she could now look back on without pain. The next morning, she opened the cafe as usual. Sunlight poured in through the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Life moved on, quietly but beautifully. A few regular customers smiled and greeted her, and she smiled back. Genuinely, she found herself humming softly as she cleaned the counter. A new day, a new calm. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. Later that afternoon, when the cafe was slow, Evelyn looked out the window and thought about Michael one last time. Not with sadness, not with longing, but with gratitude. Because even though their story didn't end in forever, it had taught her something real. Love doesn't always stay. But when it's true, it leaves warmth instead of scars. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting that truth settle in. The sound of the coffee machine hummed softly behind her. The doorbell chimed with new customers, and life kept moving, just as it should. Evelyn smiled and whispered under her breath, the same words that had followed her through everything. I just kept quiet, accepted it, and this time she meant it.